This episode of the BREWtallyspeaking podcast is brought to you by On Point Pomade. Keep your beard and hair looking on point with their line of pomades and beard oils over at onpointpomade.com. Use our code BSP15 at checkout and get 15% off your total purchase order. So thanks again to On Point Pomade for sponsoring our show. This episode is also sponsored by the Bean Bastard Coffee. Head over to thebeanbastard.com and pick up any one of their delicious hand-roasted coffees. Coffee lovers will also enjoy their hand-cut and handmade espresso candles and soaps as well. If you're in the Buffalo, New York area, head to their store located at 448 Elmwood Avenue. And thanks again to the Bean Bastard for supporting this show. The Speaking podcast is proudly sponsored by Rockabilia.com. With over 500,000 officially licensed items in their online store, you're guaranteed to find something you need. Use our code BREWtally and get 10% off your total purchase order. Now on to the show.
People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard. And you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna give up.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the BREWtallyspeaking podcast. I am your host, John, and this episode's guest is Josh James of Stick to Your Guns, 18 Visions, I believe of the band Extremist, with Davey and Jade from AFI. And I have been wanting to get Josh on the podcast for so long. Like, when I had started the show, there's probably like 15 to 20 guests I had put out there that I wanted to get. And for the most part, I've gotten, I think there's only like 3 or 4 left that I haven't gotten. And Keith Buckley being one of them. But I did get Andy from ETID. I think my goal was actually just to have someone from ETID, and I crushed that like in the first like 8 months to a year. So Josh is one of the last like of my original bucket list guests that are still out there that I haven't gotten, but now I have. So keep chasing your dreams, kids. Someday they will come to fruition if you try hard enough. And this didn't disappoint, man. Like, it's funny sometimes when you hear someone on another podcast, you're like, fuck, I need to get them because they're so good. Like, you just basically ask a question and you're set. Like, they just go. They have stories for hours and they can just rattle them off. And it's infinitely entertaining. And that's exactly what Josh is as a podcast guest. He is just podcast gold. He should have his own show. And I'm not even joking. I think he should have his own show. I think him with a bunch of his friends would be, that'd be a day one subscribe for me. I would listen to that every episode he put out. The interesting thing about this, though, was, lining it up with Josh, because he's always fucking busy. He's always on the road. He went straight from a Stick to Your Guns tour supporting their newest record and touring all over to then immediately getting in basically a van or whatever with the 18 Visions guys and doing the Vanity 20-year touring that just literally wrapped up. I think the last couple of shows, were this past weekend as I'm when I'm recording. So, like, that dude has been on the road for, like, a few months now at this point, just straight, maybe having a day off. Just a road warrior. He is one of the OGs kind of the scene, in my opinion. As we joke in this episode about Scott Vogel outliving and outperforming everybody, he is now in that same breadth, of the Scott Vogels, of, some of the living legends of the hardcore scene, because he's given his life to it. He has lived a life in this scene and grown up in it and become an elder statesman of sorts. And it's weird to think because, he's not much older than me and I don't feel old and I know he doesn't feel old, but it's weird to think, like, when you think of him and the bands he's been in, he has been such kind of an integral part of hardcore and metalcore to a degree as well, that it's hard not to think of one without the other. It kind of just goes hand in hand. And it was really a privilege to get to talk to him. And as I later ended up finding out when we chatted in Detroit at the 18 Vision show, he kind of was like, yeah, I don't really do press anymore because, like, I've been doing it for so long. What the fuck else is there to say? And I want to take a moment to actually thank, the Atom Splitter PR firm, Amy, Tim, everybody over there, because they went to bat for me to have Josh come on the show. And when he told me how much they were kind of going to bat for me, saying that he should do the show, that means a lot because they don't have to do that. And Josh could have just been like, fuck it, I ain't doing it. So the fact that he did, this is just a really special episode to me. The fact that, he took the time to talk, and we talk about so much interesting things to me and funny things. Like I said, Josh is just a great person to listen to tell stories. And I think I just want to extend that gratitude out to Josh and the PR firm of Atom Splitter. So without further ado, this is my conversation with Josh, and I'll talk to you on the other side of it.
Like, oh, there's a nice breeze, but fuck, we're just melting.
Yeah, global warming is not a real thing.
No, my stepdad Homer would agree with you.
I remember being at a bar, and I had some dude tell me these like random stats. He was like, in Alaska and at like one of the hottest points, like the temperature was about the same, which it's never been. He goes, and people are trying to tell us like global warming's a thing. And I was like, that literally is exactly what you just said, you fucking dick. And he's like the irony of like how people don't even realize when they're telling you a fact to try to showcase that they're being smarter than you or what people are telling you. You're like, you're a fucking idiot, dude.
Yeah, and also it's like, I feel like with nowadays, with how everybody's an expert on everything, I've gotten to a point where I'm like, oh, I just don't even care if you are smarter. Like, I just don't want to hear whatever you've read on the internet. Like if I go to the doctor,
I don't know. And
tell me something, I'm going to listen a little bit more.
Well, I was going to say, and by the way, we're recording just so you're aware of that, because this is more of a conversation than like a, hey, by the way, your record, what tuning are you in, or something like that.
Why does that thing suck?
Well,
why does your record suck so bad?
To some people, the best thing you ever did was when you barely knew anything. So I always think that's interesting when people are like, the best record was the first. And you're like, but I'm so much more of a better person than I was.
Yeah, it's when I was
17.
I was really trying to figure it out then, and now I think I got an idea. So whatever. I love that. One of the first times that Stick to Your Guns ever went to Europe, I was on the tour, but I wasn't in the band. I was in the other one of the other bands, and a guy came up to Jesse, and he said, "I don't understand." He goes, "Your last record, oh, I love it, so brutal, but this record, why do you sound like such a," and then dropped an F-bomb, and then it was just like, and he was just like, why does it sound so bad? And then we're like, first off, that's insane that you're using that phrase. And then also second off, it's just like, what a wild thing to say. And we always have there's this thing specifically in Germany that we refer to as the German honesty. And
I know a lot of people, and I'm not going to mention names, but that is a running joke about the things they say.
And it's like, it's kind of fucking crazy that like anyone thinks it's fine to come up to you and get this close in your face and be like, last time you fucked my face off live, but this time you sound like such shit. Why? And I'm like, motherfucker, I'm day 38 in a tour. I'm going to knock you out. Like what? Like what do you think you're doing? But yeah, it's insane. People are wild.
Well, I mean, like I said, I won't mention the names of the people. Maybe when we're done recording, I'll mention them so you have a frame of reference. But it's one of those that, like, I love it because it's something, and as you just kind of said, it's so wild and so different from how people normally talk to you.
Sure.
That it's almost kind of refreshing to a degree because you're just in awe of that someone would be that forthright with you to your fucking face. But the other side of it is just like, who the fuck would say that?
Yeah, I think for me, it's always like if it's the first half of the tour, you can say it and I'll find it refreshing and funny. If it's the second half of the tour, you need to back the fuck up and get out of my space.
Yeah, it's really weird. Like, and I've been kind of talking to a lot of people about that recently too, where like the sweet spot of touring, where it's like the beginning of tour is kind of fun. You're still kind of getting into the throes of like, all right, like we're playing the set. I kind of know it forward and backward, but there's still like fuck ups and technical cues maybe that aren't happening. But that sweet spot of like 2 to 3 weeks into a tour where you're like, everything's great. You're not road fatigued. You're right in the midst of it. And then here come sharply around the corner, like that 4th week and on, you're like, fuck, can we go home at any point now?
Yeah, it's kind of, we were just talking about this. It's kind of, because we were just out for 2 months, and it's pretty wild that if you're doing a 2-month tour, once you get to like where you see the end, it's just like, oh, fuck, I'm falling apart. I got to get me on the plane ASAP, like, let's cut some songs. Like, let's get through this. And then it's the same thing if it's just a 10-day tour. For some reason, you have the same reaction when you get to like day 6 or 7. You're like, oh my God. And so there's something about like just the last, I don't know, 5% of any tour, whether it's 4 days long or 40 days, you're just like, I'm going to put a drill through my head. And it's really interesting. They should do some studies on that. They probably find some very interesting things with musicians' dumb brains.
Well, I mean, shit, you want to go even beyond that. I always find it funny when people are like, I'm ready to be off the fucking road. Fuck everybody. Fuck my band. Fuck the crew. Like, I don't want to see anyone. A week after you're home, man, when's that next tour? I'm ready to go.
Oh, dude, yeah. Like before the pandemic, we were, I would say we were definitely like that. It was one of those things where we would just beat ourselves into the ground. And then at the end of the tour, we would have a talk and we're like, okay, no matter what gets offered to us or no matter what happens, like we need to make sure that we start taking off like 5 weeks or 6 weeks in between tour. And then we get home and 3 days later, it would be like, hey, you just got this offer, for this tour and it's 9 weeks long. And then it means you only have 2 days off after that to the next tour. And then we go, yeah, let's do it. And then, we get on that tour, we say the same thing. It's just, the definition of crazy. But
well, I mean, there's a couple of things you've kind of already brought up that, were sort of talking points I wanted to bring up as a whole. I've wanted to have you on the show for the longest time because, I mean, you on any podcast I've heard is just like podcast gold because we don't have to do fuck all of nothing because you have stories for days and can just go. So from my perspective,
I went to an astrologer once. And it was my wife and I. It was like before we got married, we thought it'd be fun to go to like a compatibility like reading, just like for fun. And then I was like, okay, if the guy says we're compatible, I'll believe it. If he doesn't, I'm gonna say fuck you. And so I already had this like preset like notion in my head. And when we got in there, he was like, ask for your birthday and what time you were born and where you were born. And he's like putting all this stuff into a chart. And then he looks at me and he goes, I bet you probably have like a bunch of like really bizarre stories, like crazy things happen to you, huh? And I'm like, yeah, actually. And he goes, yeah, that's because your whole life is Mercury retrograde. And he was like, so your whole life is chaos. And then he looked at my now wife and he goes, and it works out because you're not affected by Mercury retrograde at all. And I was like, oh, great. I'll believe in this now. But I was like, actually, yeah. And then, so now it's the joke between my friends and I that it's like, when people were like, oh, Mercury's in retrograde, I'm like, oh, that's my whole life. So it doesn't matter. I'm not going to sign any documents.
But no, it's interesting because you had talked about, when we were joking about people who spread misinformation and don't realize they're doing it by basically advocating for the thing that they are staunchly against.
Yeah.
You were talking about, I'm going to take a medical professional's advice for things. Kind of, this kind of gets a little bit serious, I guess, right out the gate. But, you had mentioned on Twitter a couple of times, you're like, oh, I'm kind of experiencing like half of my body going numb. Anyone know what the fuck it is? Because that's the first thing everyone does is go to Twitter for any diagnosis.
Yeah.
But I mean, how scary was it for you when you realized this wasn't kind of like maybe a one-off thing, but it kind of kept coming back?
Yeah, it was really strange. So it really started about 3 months ago. Oh, about 10 weeks ago. So I went to bed one night and the back of my leg was numb. And I just thought, okay, whatever. And then I woke up the next day and my whole left leg was numb. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And so I, do what everybody does and just Googles their symptoms because we live in America and it's not like I'm going to go to a doctor. And so I Google it and I'm like, oh, sciatic nerve. That makes sense. I probably fucked something up around there. So it says, it takes 6 to 8 weeks for it to get better. And I go, okay, fine. And then my wife was working in New York at the time. I was just about to leave for this 2-month tour. I flew from LA to New York to hang out with her. And one day when she was at work, I went and I was getting my lower back, I have a back piece that I've been getting worked on out there. And so I had an appointment with the guy and he's tattooing my back. And, I feel it. And then all of a sudden, I'm not feeling anything. And I go, hey, what are you doing? And he goes, I'm tattooing the lower left side of your back. And I was like, I don't feel that. And in my brain, I'm like, I should feel that. And that's when I realized that the numbness had raised from my leg up into my abdomen to here. And then, so I was just like, oh, that's kind of weird. But I still really wasn't in pain. It was just a really weird sensation to not feel anything. And then I flew to Florida. That's where our tour was starting. I got there a couple of days early because it was my brother's birthday. And then my birthday, they're back to back. So we're like, oh, we'll hang out for our birthdays. And him and I are hanging out. And then I'm like, I think I'm rubbing my chest or something. And I go like this. And then I realize I can't feel now up to here.
Oh.
So at that point I was like, okay, well, my heart's next and then my face and then my arm. And I need my heart to live and I need my hand to pay to live.
Right.
So I'm like, so that's when I went to the hospital and I went to a walk-in clinic and the doctor was like, you need to go to the emergency room right now. I'm going to write paperwork up so you can skip the line in the emergency room. And I'm like, oh, this sounds severe. And I went to the emergency room and then it's crazy because, I haven't had health insurance for the majority of my life until I got married. I got on my wife's health insurance. And so I've just pretty much avoided going to hospitals. I've been in the emergency room one other time. And it's pretty fucking crazy how instantly they're like, okay, you might have MS or you might have this other thing that, pretty much your arms and your legs are going to fall off and you're going to grow 9 eyes, and it's just what are you talking about? And so then they're pumping all this shit into me that sounds so scary, and they start doing CT scans and MRIs and they admit me to the hospital and I'm there for a couple of days. And then they finally come in and they're like, okay, your brain scans look good. You have severe herniated disc in your neck and in your thoracic. And we didn't do your lumbar because that's not going to be life threatening. And it was also, have you ever had an MRI?
I think once a long time ago.
It's when you're in the little
the tube and you have to sit still. Yeah.
Dude, so I had one on my hand before and it was fine because I was on my side. So this time when I went in, they were like, have you had an MRI before? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, okay, are you okay with it? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. And it makes all these loud, crazy noises. But I like it because I can sit there and try to make a song. It just sounds like fucking Degent or something, And this time they put me in, I lay down and they put my head in this brace and it goes in a cage.
Oh.
And then so I feel like I'm the man in the iron mask and then it slides me into the tube and the tube's only this far away from your face. And I'm like, panic, panic, panic. I'm hitting the panic button and I'm like, I can't do this. I guess I'm claustrophobic. And they end up laying a washcloth over my eyes. And I had to do this 2-hour, it was a 2-hour MRI. It was fucking insane. But anyway, the doctor comes in, this neurosurgeon comes in and he's like, okay, here's the situation. You need to have surgery. So I can do surgery on you in 2 days. I will bump you to the front. We'll do disc infusion. We'll fuse your disc together. How's that sound? And I'm like, that sounds fucking horrible. Also, this dude walked in and I was like naked the entire time I was in the hospital. And so when anyone would come in, I would just put like a gown over my dick. And so like he walked in and saw how tattooed I was. And he goes, "Whoa, tatted up, man." And then he goes, "You know, if I was ever to get tats, I'd do the same thing. I'm the kind of guy that's like, go big or go home." And in my brain, I'm thinking, that's not what I want from a surgeon. I want to get neck surgery. He's going to give me tits. You know, like, yeah, go big or go home. Let's replace everything on this guy. And I was like, so he's sitting there telling me like, yeah, let's do surgery right away, blah, blah, blah. And I go, yeah, I don't know, man. I got to go on tour. And he's like, tour? What are you doing? Tell him. He goes, well, where are you going? And I'm like, oh, I got to go to South America and I got to go to Europe. I'll be gone for 2 months. And he goes, you can't do that. If you do that, you're going to come back paralyzed. And at that moment, that was like, it's very rare that I feel like, oh, this is very serious situation. And I was like, oh, that's not good at all. And then, you know, I think it's so easy. And that's like with anything, you know, whether it's politics or whatever it is, it's so easy to get scared by something without really looking into other parts of it. And I had a real moment of like internal panic with that. And then I remembered, well, everyone keeps asking me all these other questions, like if I can't move my foot, if I have like trouble walking, if I stumble a lot, if I have lost control of my bowels or my urine. And I'm like, none of those things have happened. So wouldn't those things happen first before I become paralyzed from this? And so him and I kind of had it out. And that's when he was like, well, he was like, you're refusing surgery. He was acting like I was committing a war crime. and so finally, when he realized like, I'm not going to do this, man, he was like, all right, well, the only way I'm discharging you out of this hospital is if you're in a neck clavicle. And I'm like, fine. And I'm thinking like a halo, like plastic chest piece, bolts in my head. And I'm like, if that's what I got to go do on tour and look like I'm fucking part of some like Halloween act, that's what I'll do. And then I'm like, all right, fine. I sent all the paperwork or whatever. And then, you know, an hour later, the nurse comes in with my discharge stuff. And she's like, okay, so here's the clavicle. And I'm like, this is like a CVS sponge, you know? And I'm like, what the fuck? And I'm like, this is what's going to stop me from being paralyzed. And I was like, that's not happening. And so, but I did, I still followed, you know, that I still wanted to use common sense with it. And later on, it was explained to me that because of what's going on in my spine, I'd be really prone to extreme whiplash. And with extreme whiplash, then if I tripped and fell, then I could become paralyzed, something like that. Obviously, you're on stage banging your head. You know, you can easily get whiplash. So I did. For all 2 months, I wore that fucking neck brace on stage, and I wore it on all the flights. In the beginning, I tried to wear it like 24/7, and then it was just like, it was like it would just hurt. Because like other parts of my body were trying to compensate for like holding my head up and shit. So then I just started wearing it on flights and on all the shows. And it was just fucking comical because, you know, like our first show is this fest where it's 90,000 people, Green Day's headlining. We have this like phenomenal set time. And I'm up there in a fucking neck brace going, you know, like I can't really see past the 12th fret. I'm like sitting there being like, oh. So there was definitely a learning curve with it. But at the end of the tour, you know, I did like PT stuff that I looked up online. I got like regular massages throughout the tour, but the numbness hasn't changed. I'm still completely numb from here all the way down. Every once in a while, it'll feel like a certain part of my body's like on fire. But other than that, it's not too bad. I've been home for a week and I've gone to different specialists every day. And the one cool thing is that they're all in agreement with like how severe things are and things in daily life that I should do and that I shouldn't do. But they also are all in agreement that this is fucking weird. And they're like, so now it's like doing weird shit where it's like, next I have to like have my blood vessels tested to see if there's something happening in my blood vessels where it's pushing up against nerves. And then there is like concern with neurological problems. So we'll just see how it pans out. I leave on Wednesday for a tour where I'm playing guitar with a band called 18 Visions. And they were like, if you can control yourself enough not to go like this with your head and jump off the stage, and you don't want to wear the neck brace, then try it. So I'm going to attempt to play these next shows just kind of chill. But it was also funny because at the end of the tour, I went, oh man, this is fucked up. For like 25 years, I've been playing shows and I've been like throwing my guitar around and jumping and doing all this shit. And I go, and I just did this tour where I didn't do anything. And the outcome was the exact same. Like the crowd was still there. No one left. They still bought the merch, whatever. And I'm like, God damn it. Like, did I waste all this energy for 25 years for nothing?
Well, I mean, a couple of things to that. Your reaction from the doctor of being like, oh, you're covered in tattoos. I've had the same thing. Like when I had, I remember I was doing not true mobile service. I was working for the parks department for a city I was living in, and I was cutting something down and it like the tree literally fell on me, but it had like thorns and shit in it. So I'm just kind of like, I can't pick it up. So it's just like resting on my shoulder. So I'm like, hey, I need someone to come help me get this thing off me. And then they're like, oh, you got a couple of the things in you. We got to take you to like the doctors or whatever. And I was like, all right. So then I had to, take off my shirt and have them look. And as soon as I did that, the guy was just like, oh, you got a bunch of tattoos, like whatever. And then proceeded to pull out a scalpel instead of like the tweezers and shit he was going to use. And then just started digging at it. I was like, just because I have tattoos doesn't mean that I don't feel shit. Like, what the fuck? Why is that your first thought of like, oh, you can handle pain, so fuck it?
It's insane that that's like a rationale. When I was like 20 years old, I got bit by a brown recluse. Ugh. And I didn't. I woke up one morning and I had this like little bump on my arm and I thought it was like a zit, but it like wouldn't pop. I was like, oh, weird. So I left my apartment. I went and got tattooed, oddly enough. And after the tattoo, I like started to feel like kind of crazy. And the tattoo was only like this big. And I was like, man, that's weird. It really took it out of me. It doesn't, yeah. I don't normally have this reaction. And that day was my girlfriend at the time, it was her birthday. And she was just the worst. And I remember calling her and being like, I feel like really bad. I think I'm sick. And she's like, I knew you were going to try to get out doing something special for my birthday. And I was like, what the fuck? No. And so I'm driving back to my apartment and I'm driving my truck and I realize I'm like, I can't make it. Like I feel like I'm about to pass out. And I was passing by my mom's house. So I stopped there and I was like, can I just like lay here? And she's like, sure. And my brother was there and they like took my temperature and it was like 102. And I felt fucking crazy. And they're like, you need to go to the doctor. I was like, no, I just need some soup and some Gatorade. Like that's it. That'll fix everything. Yeah. And so, and my mom was like, all right, well, promise me if you wake up in the morning and it's still bad, you're going to go to the walk-in clinic down the street. And I woke up and and the fever was like now like 103. And I'm like, okay. So I go to the doctor and I had like crazy abdominal pains. Like it really fucking hurt. And so I went in there and I told him, I'm fucked up. I don't know what's going on. My stomach hurts. And they put me into an examination room. And I'll never forget this. Like, it seemed like it was something out of like, a fucking Judd Apatow or a Seth Rogen movie where someone walks in and they're like, okay, she's like, what seems to be the problem? And I'm like, I feel really bad. Like, okay, do you have any like weird cuts or scrapes or bumps or blah, blah? I'm like, no. And then I'm like, well, there's this. And she goes, oh my God. And she like panicked. And she picks up a scalpel and she just stabs my arm. and starts like sawing at my arm. And I'm like, like, what are you doing? And then she's like, you've been bitten by a brown recluse. If we don't get this out, you're gonna lose your arm. I'm like, get it out. And I'm like, somebody give me something. And like, and then they come and give me an IV, and then I like start like cutting my fucking flesh out of my arm. And I remember like she was like, oh, like later on I talked to her, she's like, oh, you're like tatted up. I thought I was fine. I'm like, I don't want to get stabbed.
Yeah.
Like, like what the fuck? It was insane. And then it turned out the funny part about that story is, so it turned out to be the brown recluse bite. And then when they started draining the arm, it was like all this like bile was coming out. And then they packed it with 6 feet of gauze. And at the time I sang for this band called Casey Jones, and we were about to leave for a tour. I'm always about to leave for a tour.
I was going to say, you're always about to leave for a tour.
Yeah. And they were like, yeah, you can't go on tour. And, I'm like, there is no can't. Like, I'm going. And the bass player at the time was getting ready to go to medical school. So I convinced this lady at the clinic to allow him to come in and to teach him how to like pack and clean out and dress the wound. And every day on tour, he would do that. We'd be like in a Chevron gas station, and he's pulling, and it looked like I got shot by a 9mm. So like we would be like in West Memphis, and some guys like, "Yo, you get shot?" And we're like, "Yeah." And then and then at the end of the tour, it was like 10 days long, and at the end of the tour, I woke up, and my brother played drums for the band, and he looked at me and he goes, "You look really fucked up." And it looked like I had sheet creases like all over my body, like when you sleep really hard or something. And I was like, oh, weird. I guess I just slept really hard. And then like 3 hours later after breakfast, he was like, you still look really fucked up. And so that night we played the show, and then we drove straight back home, and I went to that clinic first thing in the morning. And I remember like I lifted up my shirt, and it looked like, it like like at the time I like was really into like horror movies, and I was like, oh my god, there's spiders inside my stomach. Like it looked like spider like eggs had hatched, and there's like all these little things all over me. And I'm sitting there, and my girlfriend goes, don't move. And I go, what? And there's a fucking spider sitting on my shoulder, and I'm like, they're hatching, they're coming out of my ass, like what the fuck? And then it just turned out I was allergic to penicillin. And they just gave me some shots of steroids in my ass. And then that's how I found out I was allergic to penicillin. But moral of the story is, if you have tattoos and you go to the doctor, just tell them beforehand, please don't stab me or with a scalpel, because the both of us have experienced that. It's nice to meet someone else that's experienced that.
Well, it's just like first and foremost, I also hate needles. Like, which is funny because everyone's like, "Oh, you must love needles." No, asshole, I don't. I actually don't like needles.
Yeah, see, I don't like the feeling of getting tattooed. Also, getting a tattoo is like getting like somehow scraped with a sunburn. Getting an injection is puncturing your skin like into it with the fucking. It's two different things.
Yeah, so, although. I did have empathized with you with the neck brace story, because when I had I'm bad at this. So when I was getting this one done, I had already had the other side done and a lot of the other shit. So like long time under a chair is painful places is not uncommon. But this one, like that one sucked so much balls, because it was like you're like on the corner of a table, so your arm's like right in the corner of it, and then you have the machine, basically the coils and all that, like on your fucking face. And then you have like a shoulder, like the elbow on your jaw. And then the other arm pushing down to stretch all this. Like 10 minutes in, and I was like sitting there thinking to myself, I was like, I don't know if I could do this. This sucks. Like worse than anything. And then I think about, and it was the first time I had the epiphany of like, getting tattooed as much as like we are, like where you're getting so many painful spots, it's going to fucking suck. It's almost like what I imagine, I guess, like the stages of grief are, like where you're like, there's denial, then there's like the bargaining, and then there's like the weird, like all these things, to then finally when it's all done and it's all healed, you're like, man, that looks fucking cool. Yeah,
all right. You know what? I'll get another one. Let me make another appointment.
But
Yeah.
the funny thing is, because and I love when people try to tell you how to heal your own tattoos. It's like, if you have enough, you already know what the fuck you're doing. Like, I
Right.
remember being at a shop in LA, just getting like a little jammer right here. And the guy was like, so what you're going to want to do. And then he just literally stood there as I'm standing there, because I'm going to let him. And then he just goes, never mind. I'm not going to tell you. You know what you're doing. It's fine.
Yeah.
But it was funny because it was one of the first times, like, because when I was driving home, I couldn't turn my fucking neck, and I needed to turn that way to drive safely. So like, I felt like I had a halo because I was just kind of doing one of these.
Yeah. It's like,
and then I was like, I looked like probably like the worst chronic masturbator, because like I would just bring this thing of like lotion, and I would just lotion my neck like every 20 minutes so it wouldn't dry up and just cause the most pain of like turning your neck.
yeah, so tight and cracking or whatever. Yeah.
Oh, it was the worst. But I was just like, probably went through like a thing of like lotion in like a week, just lathering this fucker up, and everyone was just like, you smell good. And I was like, thank you.
Thank you. Like, you smell good, but you're also flaking all over your food.
You have Fruity Pebbles skin right now.
You're a disgusting pig.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting. What so I haven't really talked to someone as heavily tattooed as you are, or as I am, on the show, but I do find it funny. What is one of your biggest pet peeves about having tattoos that people want to come and talk to you about? Like, I guess I'll start. Like, one of my biggest ones is when people will fucking grab me that I don't know, and then start like grabbing my arm and being like, what's this? Or like lift up my shirt or whatever, because they can see through a white shirt. And I'm like, roles reversed. How would you feel if I were to do that to you? And a lot of people are just like, oh, I guess it's not cool, is it?
There was a long time ago, I think it was before, this had to be like 2003 or 4. So we're not quite at a time where there can, we're not at a time where everybody's getting their face tattooed and can be like a millionaire. And and this lady walks up to me in a grocery store, and she just comes up to me and she goes, those aren't ever going to come off your body, right? And it pissed me off so bad. And I went, yeah, a lot like all that fat hanging off yours. And then she goes, and I was just like, man, fuck you for coming up and saying some whack shit like that. Nowadays, I think most of the time people just like, yo, man, like your sleeves. And it's funny to me because I'm like, you don't even know what is on here.
Yeah.
Like, you just see a couple of arms. It's not like they're like, hey, can I look at your arm? And they're like, looking at it. It's like a guy walks like, yo, man, sick tats, like your sleeves. I'm going to get some too. Cool. I don't care. I think the funniest thing to me about tattoos, and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, but I'm going to really like age myself now, but when I started getting tattooed, it was like a really big deal if you got anything below the elbow. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I got my first forearm tattoo, I went in and we were all set up, and I knew the dude that was tattooing me. He'd already tattooed me a lot, and he was like a crazy motherfucker. Like, he was a wild. He was like the stereotypical psycho tattooer.
But that's how it was back then, though.
Right, exactly. And he looked at me and he goes, "Are you sure you want to do this? Because once you do this, you're going to be fucked." Mm-hmm. And that guy telling me that, I was like, oh, okay, this is like a big deal. And then I remember being like, yeah, I don't ever want to be normal. Like, this is going to force me, like, because at that time, you couldn't get a job or anything with visible tattoos. I was like, oh, this is going to force me to commit to sticking with music or some kind of life that is just part of a subculture or a scene that I like. That's that's less of just less of a 9-to-5 straight life. Because I had tried that and I knew that I couldn't hack it. And I was like, yeah, I don't ever want to be normal. And then, like, you fast forward 20 years. And like I said, it's like, you can be a CEO now with a fucking your entire face covered, or you can, I remember also back then, like, no one would tattoo your hands fingers or neck, unless everywhere else was already tatted up. And it's just funny because now it's like I saw someone yesterday with just a hand tat. You know, they had like a hand, neck, and something right here. I'm like, this is fucking wild, but it's just comical how it turned into be this thing where it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna set myself apart from everybody else, and then now I'm like, fuck, I look like everybody else now.
It's funny. Ricky Rackman and I were talking about that a while ago because we had both been to a mutual friend's house to do his podcast, like in Atlanta. And I was like, you know, he lives in an area where like the houses are like gated community, $2 million homes kind of thing. And I was like, and then, you know, there's Ricky like strolling up on his bike and all that. And then there's me, like, because he has you go the back way to where the basement is, where the studio is. And I'm just like, it just probably looks a little sketchy that here are these like two heavily tattooed guys trying to walk through the back of your house to get in. Like, who the fuck are these people?
Yeah.
And he goes, I don't think it's like that anymore though. I think, you know, like you were saying, like CEO of whatever fucking place now probably has like knuckle tattoos that say like software or something.
Yeah, straight up. And it's funny because when I was a kid, the only people that had tattoos were pretty much criminals and military, and you know, biker gangs, which you know are synonymous with being a criminal. And I remember like my friend's dad was a biker. And like, so all of those guys be over there and it's just like beards, long hair, leather jackets, you know, porno mags. I was like, this is so cool. You know, I'm like 10 years old. And, but I assumed that you could only get tattoos in prison. You know, I'm a kid, so I don't fucking know. And so I remember thinking like, oh, fuck. Like when I watch the movies, prison looks so crazy, but I guess I'm going to have to go to prison because I really like tattoos. Luckily that didn't have to be the case, but yeah, it's interesting how, you know, now it's like such a, it's like a real, you know, and also at the same time, it's like, you know, good for those people. That's cool that people get to express themselves however they want. It's also cool for the tattoo industry, I'm sure, to be able to like probably be less of a grind, I guess. I'm sure there's more competition now, but you know, there's more people in it. People have probably a lot more options of better artists because there are more people and they have so much stuff to work off of, you know, where like the generation of tattooers that I was getting tattooed from obviously only had 50 years of stuff to look at. And, you know, now people now have 70 or 80 years of stuff to look at. So it's like everything else. It's cool and it's not cool. You know,
I just find it fun because it's like it's really interesting, you know, and I've said this to people and it doesn't like marginalize anyone's experiences at all. But it's like, to me, I've had some of the most horrific shit said to my face just because of how I chose to look to feel normal in my own body for once. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things where it's like, I know I chose to look this way, but it is interesting just to see how just putting something on your body will make someone treat you completely different. And it kind of puts it into perspective of how other races probably have felt the same way their entire existence.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like, I obviously I can't imagine what it's like to be anything other than a white guy, because that's all I've been. But yeah, I mean, that little tiny 1% glimpse into it is interesting. You know, I remember going somewhere one time to look at an apartment. You know, this is 20 years ago, and the lady was just like, "No, I'm sorry, we're not renting that out anymore." And then 2 weeks later, it was still for rent. And then I actually knew someone who ended up getting the apartment. And I was like, this is probably because of tattoos or whatever. And then after that, I always put a button up shirt on and like, "Hi, how are you?" You know, and just try to, "What do you do?" "Oh, I'm a touring musician," you know, instead of, because saying I play in a band sounds like, oh, this guy's not going to be able to pay for shit. You know, and so like there's no way. And then you like, if I'm sitting there shirtless trying to fill out an application or wearing a wife beater or something, they're like, "Yeah, never mind. We don't want like a meth head in here." You know, so.
Yeah, I think the best thing I've been told working customer service, I had a lady wait in line to tell me this. And she was just like, I was like, hi, how are you doing today? Find everything all right? She was like, yeah. And I go, all right, cool. And then she goes, do you have parents? And in my head, I'm trying real fast to figure out where this is going, because I'm like, I've never heard this question before. And then I was like, yeah, I have parents. And then, I'm still ringing up her shit. And then she goes, well, you must not have parents who care, because parents who care don't let their children grow up to look like you. And then I was just like, all right. Finished ringing her up. And I was just like, all right. And then she like kept on saying something, and I just kind of like didn't care. And then she went and filled out a comment card against me. And then I remember complained against me to my friend who was my boss. And she was like, I want to make a complaint against how he looks. He goes, you mean like our front end manager, who's like the best person we have that literally will run and sprint to go help people? And she was like, yeah, I don't like how he looks. He's like, well, I'm sorry, then don't shop here.
Yeah, it's so weird.
But then it was funny because like the line across from me and then the people in my line were like, you know what? You're awesome. You're always hardworking. And she had a stupid hat anyway. And I was like, sure, stupid hat. It's fine.
Yeah, all right, whatever.
But it's just one of those, like, you're just like, all right, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
Yeah.
Or I also love the one too where people are like, oh, did you get those in prison? And you're like, motherfucker, you ever seen what prison tattoos look like? No.
Yeah, someone recently asked me that, and then it was later on I realized it was so that they could tell me that they had been in prison, and that's where they got all their tattoos. But in my brain, I was thinking like, no, motherfucker, like, no, you have eyes. Also, you've been in prison, and look at your arm and look at mine. We're standing 3 feet from each other.
Yeah, I
will say some of the shit that comes out of prisons, some of it looks fucking awesome. So this guy's shit did not. It was just just chicken scratch.
My wife's cousin got a back piece when he was in, and she was showing it to me, and she was like, "Oh, does this look terrible?" And she goes, "This is what a prison tattoo looks like." I go, "I mean, you're not gonna want to hear this. Honestly, that's pretty solid for a full back piece done in prison. Like it's legible from afar. Doesn't look horrible under the circumstances." And I was like, if I was on some, prison tattoo TV like reality show, I'd be like, the line work's pretty good and consistent. Like this is actually not
shocked.
bad.
I am shocked that they have not done that yet.
Actually, shit. I think
like an Ink Masters,
Ink
Masters Prison Edition.
Yeah,
like I'm shocked that they haven't done that shit.
It's just all of them fixing up Dave Navarro's tattoos.
Holy fuck! Straight up.
Actually, he already did that. I think Oliver Peck did his whole back, and then he went and started doing the suspension from it. And I was like, that's probably not a great idea.
Yeah, sure.
Just have these holes in your back where you spent hours getting your tattoos. Kind of speaking sort of on what we've been talking about, you had made a post on Instagram a little while ago after Furnace Fest. So going back like a year, almost a year to the day, since it's coming up in like a month or two. Mm-hmm. The quote was, and it was kind of weird because it was, during the pandemic, and kind of I was thinking a lot about, life and what life was and what life will be, and, just kind of how we're existing. And you had made a comment that you said that it felt like Furnace Fest and playing the sets with 18 Visions and, doing the song with Evergreen. It said it felt like a time warp to an era with no agenda or direction, just a bunch of fucked up kids taking it day by day. And when you said that, it was kind of weird because I kind of realized that it's like, I think there's a lot of us of a certain age, I'm about to be 38 in like 2 months. And it's one of those where when you kind of like hit some of these milestones, like you're getting closer to 40 or you hit 30 or whatever, you start kind of looking at your life a little bit differently. And I know for me personally, like I've kind of always felt like that's sort of how I've adhered to my life. But it's weird when I look at some of my other friends, it's like, you got like crust punk friends and shit like that people wouldn't assume I would associate with because it's not my scene. But it's funny to see like Father It's You just bought another house, like the second house, and moved up and got a bigger house, more property, more land, all this kind of stuff. And to kind of think about how like he's still the same dude that I've known when we were in high school, that like we do horribly dumb shit and we're still the same fucked up kids. Like I don't feel like I've really ever grown past 17 mentally in my head, even though I know I have. But it's like I feel like that's sort of a generation of us where we just kind of had no agenda or direction. But yet here we are, and we've somehow made a life for ourselves, just kind of going day by day, not really, I think, thinking long term necessarily.
Yeah, sure. And I think there's a lot of things to play in with that. I think especially being involved in like hardcore, metalcore, whatever you want to call it, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there the that was a moment where it was still so underground.
Mhm.
And I don't mean that in like a cool way. I just meant anyone that was involved with that was not thinking long term at all, was not thinking about being able to live off of it. And I think around like 2004 is when those things started to shift, where bands started to get management and where Headbangers Ball started, Josta started hosting Headbangers Ball, and he started getting more like hardcore metalcore bands on there. And you kind of started seeing, and then with that, you saw outsiders come in because they saw that there was something there and that it could be turned into, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but like it could be turned into um, a money making genre. So then all of a sudden you have people that are managing big radio rock bands are starting to look at bigger hardcore bands. You have bands like Hatebreed breaking out and doing these tours. You have the 2003 or 4 Ozfest, where all of a sudden there's like Every Time I Die and Walls of Jericho, and you're like, Ozfest?
Yeah.
This is fucking nuts. And so from that, from especially I'd say it's definitely around 2005 onward, I think bands started functioning a little bit differently. And again, it's not a bad thing, but that post was just, thinking about playing Furnace Fest in the early 2000s. It was just a bunch of, and it's still fucked up, a lot of fucked up people. But, I would also say that like the change that I've seen over the last couple of decades is that a lot of people exchange the football for the guitar. I've gone on tour with a lot of people and I end up having a conversation with them, whatever, newer bands or whatever. And they don't last for that long because it's just, there's someone that's like, oh yeah, I'm going to be in a band because like they don't know anything about like the core ideas of what hardcore and punk and all of that is. And they just look at, instead of them being a jock, they were just like, yeah, I'm going to be I watched MTV Made and I'm going to be a fucking metalcore guy and I can go, yeah, and I'm going to scream whatever. And I'm going to get chicks and I'm going to get fucked up on drugs. I'm going to drink. I'm going to be a fucking rock god. And you see that, there are certain bands that you've seen where they started off in metalcore or hardcore and whatever, people changed. I understand that, but you also see people's intentions, and you have seen people that have successfully done it to where they are like, I'm this D-level rock star. And I think that shit's fucking whack. And I think that like that praise of the ego is a weird thing to do. And I just think that, that moment at Furnace Fest, I saw all these people from 20 years ago. And, of course, a lot of them have been made very successful lives. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't, of course it would be dumb for me to be an adult at this point to be like, I don't care. Let's go play the show for $50 and eat pasta and sleep on a stranger's floor. It's like, fuck that. I already did that. I don't want to do it anymore. Like, I need to make money to pay my bills and all this shit. And of course we do have to run this as a business and also try to find the way to still stay connected to our roots at the same time. But yeah, that moment at Furnace Fest was like a real true flashback, especially because it was at the exact same place where the festival used to be. The same bands were playing. So it was a reminder of how that time was definitely not like innocent. There's a bunch of things that people did where they're definitely guilty, but it was like, a different form of innocence then, and
Yeah.
I think back then it was like, there was no question about why you were there. It was just because you fucking loved it, and it was something that you truly connected to. And you probably, chances are, you didn't fit in anywhere else, and you found that. And I
Yeah.
think it's really cool now that people don't have to do that. I do think it's great that people feel, hopefully people feel less isolated, so they can go to a Turnstile show, and then they can go to a Lana Del Rey show, and then they can go to a Stick to Your Gun show, and then they can go fucking see Adele and be like, I like all of this. I think that's really cool, and people can feel like that they fit in more places. I think that's wonderful and great. But that was a cool moment playing Furnace Fest and just having that nostalgic feeling. And it was also like a moment where it verified, oh, even though I still feel like I'm 17, I'm clearly an old fuck now because I'm saying things like this that only a jaded asshole would say.
Well, I think it's funny because, like, so my last week, like calendar week, I went to go see Blues Traveler, Train, and Jewel, or Jewel and Train. They were headlining. And I remember I asked my wife if she wanted to go because a friend of mine is the drummer now for Train. Because when I used to book shows, I had booked his band from New York. And then he, like, after a couple of tours, left that band, became a studio musician, and just worked his way up, and now is a drummer for Train. And it was funny. My wife's like, I fucking hate all those bands. I ain't going. I was like, at least it'll be fun. You'll know at least hits from every band. And she's like, no, I'm not interested. You can go take someone else. So, like, we went, and I remember everyone along the way to get, like, my tickets and all that shit, everyone was just kind of like staring at me because I definitely did not look like anyone else there.
Right.
And I remember going up to the will call, and I had my prescription sunglasses on so I could see someone doing this. But, like, I was at the will call, and I was like, lady's like, can I help you? I was like, yeah, I should be on Train's guest list, I believe. And then I just handed, like, my ID, and I see the lady next to me just do one of those and then just continually watch me as I walked away, trying to figure out how the fuck I would have that kind of a hookup.
Right.
So then the seats we got were, like, obviously really great. And it was one of those, like, all the people around me were like, so who are you here to see? And I was like, oh, a little bit of everybody. And they're like, oh, do you like this kind of music? And I was like, yeah, like, Jewel's pretty cool. Like, she's got some hits. So I was like, Train's, I mean, like, I was like, I've worked at grocery stores for a long time. I've heard all the hits. Like, they're, you hear them enough, you like them. And I was like, yeah, it'll be fun. So then, like, the next day after that, went to the Acacia Train to go see them. And then went to, like, a more mainstream rock kind of metal festival here in town this past weekend, and then Rod Stewart in like a week and a half. And it's just like, that's me kind of in a nutshell. If you could throw in, like, a Kanye West concert somewhere in there, like, that would kind of encapsulate, like, everything that I'm about musically. But it's funny because I feel like it's weird that, we're in 2022 and people will ask you, like, what's your guilty pleasure musically? And I'm like, I don't have one. If I fucking like it, I like it. And I don't care if you do or don't. Like, it has no bearing on me. I'm here to have a good time. Music's supposed to be a release. Why are we still gatekeeping fucking music? And it's just wild that, like, people feel that way. But interestingly, like, I had that epiphany.
It is a very juvenile, like, I think that it's a very juvenile way to think, whenever I was a kid, it was definitely a thing where it's like, don't tell him about fucking Mustard Plug. He's a poser, and it's like, and then you get older, and then, especially after you start being in a band's perspective, you're like, I want everyone to, like, listen to what I write. And if they like it, if they feel something from it, then fucking sick. And that's the way it should be. With that said, I was talking to some friends last night, how it's bizarre now that with, and I'm sure this has to do with internet and social media, like, now whenever a trend would be set in, I don't know, New York or LA or Tokyo, it would take a long time to get to a place like Jacksonville, Florida, right? But now it's, like, pretty instant because you have Instagram, there's influencers and all this stuff. So everybody worldwide sees, mom jeans are back in style. So everybody's wearing mom jeans. Or, like, now it's really cool to dress like you're from 1993. you know, and like instantly that's, you know, that happens. And it's interesting how I think that that's also affected, where typically we would associate the way that somebody would look with also what like kind of subculture they're involved in. Recently, or a year and a half ago, I had to go do some legal shit, and I had to meet like a representative for something. And he came, and he was young, and he was wearing short sleeves, and he had like really nice looking traditional tattoos. And I was like, oh, this dude for sure listens to hardcore. And, you know, like there's no way he doesn't. He looks like he'd be scuffing it up in the pit and like just can't wait for the next Terror release. And I'm like, and he asked me, he was like, what do you do for a career? I'm like, I'm a musician. He's like, oh, that's cool. What kind of music do you play? I'm like, you know, like hardcore, right? And he's like, no, what's that? And I was like, and I go, what kind of music do you listen to? And he goes, mostly jazz. And I'm like, this guy's got a skull and a dagger right here. He's got a snake, you know what I mean? Like all the traditional stuff. And I'm like, what? You know, and it's just like so mind blowing. And I was just thinking like, wow, that's really crazy that now like you can't look at someone. And I'm sure that like the generation of you know, older than us feels even more bizarre because they see people covered in tattoos and they go, oh, they're not going to like rape and rob me.
Right.
You know, like, oh, this is insane. So it's just, you know, it's cool in that sense that everybody has like more freedom to express themselves or to be able to try out, you know, new trends or whatever, if that's what they're into. but it also is like, as an old person now, I am now officially fucking confused. You know, where I'm like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, it was interesting. Like we went out to, and this is kind of speaking of how like awesome my wife is. So I remember a couple years ago, I was sitting like doing something back in this room, and I just get a text. It's like, want to go see 18 Visions in LA? And I was like, on Valentine's Day or like the day after Valentine's Day or whatever. And I was like, fuck yeah. I was like, of course I do. And then so we went out to LA to the Roxy show that you guys played. And it was funny because like I'd never been in that venue. I'd never like been out to LA or the West, like that far west at the time. And it was so weird because the way the Roxy opens up, like literally once you walk in, you're basically on the fucking floor.
Yeah.
And like I forget who was playing. It was like the two bands before you guys. And I remember like just a fucking like D-beat breakdown part comes, and I instead of being like, oh shit, and kind of being whatever, I just kind of was like, it didn't dawn on me to do much of anything. And then I just kind of was like, look back at my wife and I was like, I mean, this is kind of what we grew up in was hardcore shows. So like neither of us felt weird. It kind of felt like oddly satisfying to walk in and be like, oh yeah, this is familiar. I know this.
Yeah.
But it's weird to go somewhere for the first time. Yeah. For the first time going somewhere and just kind of being like, most people's reaction would be, where's my wife? I need to make sure she's okay. And
sure.
My reaction was just like, we're fine. Although she had to pull me out of the way because I almost caught a roundhouse kick from Davey from Davey Havoc when he was getting down to Tower of Snakes, and I was like, "Holy shit!" That would have been a real great story. What happened to your face? Well, I wasn't paying attention, and Davey Havoc in a tunic roundhouse kicked me.
Oh yeah, of course he was in a fucking tunic. Yeah, he was actually. Him and I were the ones that were discussing this yesterday. About just like, I don't know what the fuck's going on anymore. So,
but I mean, like, I feel like, I mean, shit. I mean, it's kind of coincidental timing of just how like these things line out. And, you know, it's funny that you mentioned going to get your stars, you know, read or your, you know, astrology.
Yeah. Astrology. Yeah.
Like I recently took the step into having a friend's wife read my cards. Cause like, I don't know that I believe in all of that, but I'm at least more adventurous to learning.
Yeah. And it's fun.
But it's funny that when you, after going to therapy during the pandemic, noticing that life will kind of throw things that are sometimes maybe too weird to be coincidental, but just to like how things will fall into place in kind of a life teaching moment of like life will find a way and it'll teach you things if you're actively paying attention to what's happening versus just kind of meandering through life and just whatevering. But so I had Brandon from Bleeding Through on, like I talked to him like 2 or 3 days ago. I have you that this fell through finally. And then James and I are going to do a real chat this time instead of opposed to the 15-minute, 20-minute one we did before the Roxy show. So it's funny that like I have kind of all three of you at once, and they're probably all going to drop roughly at the same time. But it's funny to kind of think about how your careers kind of collectively all are similar, where you started kind of playing a certain style of music. It changed over time. You started doing other bands, but you guys are all still here. And you guys are all indirectly kind of play together. I mean, not Brandon and James, obviously, or you and Brandon, but I mean, I think it's interesting to just kind of see how even through the decades of riding through trends, whatever, you guys are still all here putting out the music you want to and just being unapologetically who you all are. And you're still on the other side of it, still getting to do it and have fun doing it. You haven't become the jaded musician necessarily.
Yeah, no, I mean, super. I think everybody that I know that's still around, that was around, whenever I started, is all very grateful. And I think also has like a lifelong connection to this type of music. And I think that's, it's fucking cool. Chris, the other guitar player in Stick to Your Guns, was in Walls of Jericho. And we always talk about how like, whenever like an older band breaks up, or we hear that like someone else quit, we're like, all right, one more down. Like, who's going to be the last guys? Who's it going to be? And we know it's going to be Vogel, but he could die any moment. His heart might give out at any moment. So it's just funny to be like, oh man, but it's cool to, and it's also cool. I think that, we tour with Terror a lot. And like, Martine from Terror has been around for forever. Same thing with, all those dudes have been. And so it's like always cool to if stories start getting told or we're all hanging out, everyone like has an understanding of like, oh yeah, I know what that was like, and it is also kind of funny now to be like when I was younger, I would go on tour with a band like Agnostic Front. And we'd sit at our Madball and like listen to them tell stories like this is crazy. And now it's funny to recently Stick to Your Guns and Terror played a show together in Germany. And then it just turned into like sitting backstage and we're just telling stories to, like Knocked Loose and Year of the Knife. And we're like, and then this fight, and then this crazy thing happened, and then this band thing, and blah, 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 there's an explosion and blah, 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 and all this shit. And it's funny how like, it's just one day Knocked Loose is going to be that band, or unless it gets to a point where like tours just become so boring, nothing crazy happens anymore because everybody's just doing this while they're on tour. So then like one time this guy got canceled on the internet. It was crazy.
One of the last questions I'll ask for you, so I don't take up too much of your day. You're getting ready, as you said, we're getting ready to go out to start doing this 20th anniversary of Vanity. The band obviously just re-put it out. I don't think you recorded guitars on that. I think it was just was it Keith
on the reissue?
Yeah.
Keith actually did everything.
Okay.
He recorded like every single thing, and then James did the vocals.
Okay, because I was gonna say I didn't see you say anything about like, yeah, I was a part of this, but like I know you're in the band, so you'll be performing these songs. Where the fuck do you find time to learn this record when you're just always on the road?
Dude, that's what's crazy is, so from a guitar perspective, 18 Vision songs are, they're just bananas, especially those. They're all like 5.5 minutes. It's like 25 different parts. And I haven't listened. Yeah. And I haven't listened to Vanity, since, and I probably haven't listened to Vanity all the way through in probably 18 years. And so on this last Stick to Your Guns tour, for the last 2 weeks, every day I would set aside time to learn one song. And then when I finally learned them all, I would sit there and I would run all of them like every single day. But it was like, I don't know, man, I probably put in like 20 to 25 hours of like actually just like learning all those songs. I knew a few because we've been playing them for years. But I think there's only two off the record that I already knew.
Yeah.
And then they were also like, after we get done playing Vanity, let's play these other 5 songs, And so it's just like, but it is cool because surprisingly, between the Neck Brace and the 18 Vision songs, I feel like right now I'm really at the top of my game guitar wise, because the Neck Brace kind of got me. I was thinking about Stick to Your Guns recently did a tour with Rise Against, and Zach, the guitar player from Rise Against, used to be in Guar. And he talked about how being in full costume made him a better guitar player because he couldn't look down and see. And so I would think about that when I was on stage, because I could only see from the neck here up. And then there were, the first couple of shows, I'm kind of like hunching over to look. But then after that, I'm like, all right, I'm just start getting confident and oh yeah, hitting that. So it did make me a better guitar player for sure. But yeah, I got to leave in a little bit to drive down to Orange County to have a 5-hour 18 Visions rehearsal tonight to make sure that we still can fucking do it all since we leave on Wednesday. But yeah, it's crazy with any band that I play with that isn't Stick to Your Guns, where I haven't been a key person in writing the music. It's if I don't consistently play it, it's just out of my brain. Davey and myself and 2 other friends do a Ramones cover band.
Oh, okay.
And so we, know 25 Ramones songs, but we get together once every 2 years. So every single time I'm like, oh, fuck, how does Pet Sematary go? And I'm sitting there putting effort into playing Ramones songs, which is crazy. But the thing about Ramones songs is they're super simple, but they're all so similar that it's easy to get them fucked up, And so it just becomes nerve wracking to be I know it's only 3 chords and then 3 other chords, but is it these 3 and then these 3? Because these 2 songs are the exact same arrangement or whatever. So it's always just cramming before a test with any band other than Stick to Your Guns, where at least with Stick to Your Guns, it's either Chris wrote it or I wrote it. And then we got together and we went over it and we changed different parts. So we were both together and writing together 90% of it. So it's okay, I might hit him up and go, wow, does the bridge go? But other than that, it's I can probably play most Stick to Your Gun songs on the fly. We recently, in Europe, we got a fest hit us up. We were playing on a Saturday, and they hit us up and they said, hey, we had a cancellation on Friday. Do you also want to play on Friday? And if you play, here's the offer, blah, blah, blah. And here's another offer if you play all of Diamond.
Oh.
And we were yeah, let's play all of Diamond. But it was just there's 3 songs on Diamond that we've probably only played 5 times total in the 10 years that the record's been out. So then it's but with Stick to Your Guns, everybody's okay, just make sure you know it. And what was crazy is I went to go play the song and I was how do I still know 90% of the song? Where with 18 Visions, I'll be wait a minute, how do I play Tower of Snakes? It's been a year since I've played this,
I think that's the interesting thing as a subpar guitar player myself is when you start playing other people's stuff, I think it was System of a Down was the first band where I was oh, these are all the same fucking chorus progressions, just in different sequential order. So if
sure,
Toxicity, it might be open 8, 10, 5. And then it's
right.
All right, Aerials might be 5, open, 8, 10. And it's just so it's real easy when you're kind of getting into it. You're oh, this is cool. It's a little trick. I know that these are the patterns and I can probably figure it out from there. However, the opposite is also true where you're just going to get lost because you're okay, I know it's one of these possible of combination of chords. Which one is it?
Yeah, straight up.
Straight up. And I don't think that's sort of the interesting thing about how that goes, but I'm very much looking forward to the 18 Vision show. My wife and I are going to go. it's funny because when we first started dating, she's like, I love 18 Visions. I was like, oh, me too. But then I realized we love different iterations of the band. So like when
I joined the band, I was like, yeah, like I like everybody in the band. And like, like I used to listen to Vanity a lot, and it was crazy how playing all the songs pre-Vanity from, until the Ink and Best Of, it was like, I was like, oh, these songs are fucking sick. Like, I really like these songs. And it's interesting how it took me joining the band to kind of become a fan of the band, which was just like an odd way to be like, yeah, I like the band.
Yeah. But yeah, she's like kind of Vanity on, hates until they're like not a fan of until out. And I'm like, oh, see, that's kind of where I got on. And then I kind of was like, it's that weird generational thing too, because I've talked about this with some friends and maybe you have as well. But like there was that era when you're a music fan where like for some of us, depending on age, you heard the heaviest thing ever. And you're like, it don't get no heavier than this.
Yeah.
And I was like, but then at least for me, it was like, okay, Korn, nothing will beat that first Korn record. It's so heavy. And then someone's like, well, here's, Meshuggah, like on Chaos Fear or whatever. You're like, this is the most wildest thing I've ever fucking heard. And then it's like, here's Slipknot's first record. You're like, this is the wildest thing I've ever fucking heard. And it's like, there was a good stretch of maybe 8 to 10 years where kind of that was the thing where someone was progressively changing what your thought of wild and aggressive and heavy was. Yeah. And they all still are those things. But it's funny because it's like some people were like, oh, that's too extreme. That's too whatever. I don't fuck with that. And then some people are like, oh, man, that's my wheelhouse. Give me the chaotic and the discordant shit and just let me go nuts for, because I'm 17, 18 and I just want to fucking have a spastic compulsion in front of 300 of my friends. Whereas like now I'm just like, no, you know what? I do kind of like some of the last 18 Visions record where it's more like straight ahead kind of like 80s throwback rock. Like I like that too. Because then I get to catch my breath and just enjoy a band playing really good with strong vocal melodies and well-written songs and not just here's a million parts being thrown at me at 1,000,000 miles an hour. It would be kind of rad. I don't think in the 2 times I've seen you guys since you got back, I don't think you've played anything off that last record, but it would be interesting to see that get thrown in and see how it goes over.
We are playing, let me see. I don't know what
Memory, because that was like kind of the biggest hit off of that record.
No, I want to see if when I first joined, we did play a couple. Oh, no, it's something off of Obsession.
Yeah.
But it's definitely more like, so we're not playing, you're talking about the self-titled record, right?
Yeah. Yep. The last,
record. No, I don't think we're playing that. we're playing all of Vanity, and then we're playing like
Crucified.
5 of their songs. I mean, it's like an hour and 5-minute set, which I'm like, are you guys sure you want to do this? But they're like, yeah, they don't really go on tour anymore or anything like that. I'm like, okay, let's do it.
Yep.
But it'll be cool. It'll be cool.
I'm very much looking forward to it. Maybe. I still think we're James and I are kind of hammering out when everything is because it's still all up in the air as to when your load in is and all that kind of crap. But I know we're gonna plan on something. But trying to think, I don't think I've been to the Sanctuary in forever, so I don't even know what's around to eat down there. But I was gonna be like, we gotta have food since I know none of you drink or anything. So food is the other way to your hearts when you're on tour.
Straight up.
Yeah, but this is very, very fun for me. I've been wanting to have you on for a while. Did not disappoint on my end, so thank you for the time. Looking forward to seeing you in about a week and a half. And what would you like to plug online or anything that you got coming up?
Stick to Your Guns has a new record called Spectre. It comes out July 29th. We've dropped a couple singles already. We got some cool stuff that we're going to put out this week as well. And then we just announced our U.S. tour that is all of September. It's in the States. It is Stick to Your Guns, Kubla Khan, Belmont, Koyo, and Foreign Hands. So, if you're interested in that, make sure you check out the record. We've been real quick. a cool thing about Spectre that I don't think we've really talked about. I know it will get talked about, and I'm sure Jesse's talked about in other interviews. But we've been sitting on this record since we finished it in 2020, in January 2020. And we were just decided that we were going to sit on it until we could go back on tour again. So it's really cool to finally put out this record. And I intentionally haven't listened to it over the last 2.5 years. And I put it on the other day, since we're talking about playing some new songs on the tour, and the record fucking kicks ass. If you are a Stick to Your Guns fan, I think that this is going to be a heavy contender to be your favorite Stick to Your Guns record. If you're not a Stick to Your Guns fan, then whatever. but yeah, like, you know, it's a really cool record, and I think that I know that Diamond is a fan favorite for most people, but I think it's really going to give Diamond a run for its money. So, yeah, Spectre, July 29th. It'll be streaming everywhere, of course. And check it out. Then come see us on tour.
I'm really hoping that what happened to the last band that decided to sit on their record until they would couture it doesn't happen to you guys.
Who's that?
Every time I die.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it probably will, but whatever. At least the record will come out.
Oh, their record did come too. Theirs did too. And then
listen, everything's got to everything's got to end, right? But this tour's fucking happening.
Yeah, I know.
So,
well, that was like the saddest thing, because like I think you guys have played the Pyramid Scheme here before, haven't you? Or are you just always intersection?
Probably.
Okay. So they played the Pyramid Scheme, and it's like a 420 cap room.
You're in Grand Rapids?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So they played Pyramid Scheme for like the first time ever in their whole like existence. Super sick show. And then like a week later is when everything just, and then Christmas show was still on, but knowing people that were going. So that was my conversation with Josh James. Again, of Stick to Your Guns. Their latest record is out now. Go pick it up. If they are touring, go see them. I don't think Josh is going to have to wear the neck brace. I know when I saw him with 18 Visions a couple of days after recording this, he did not have a neck brace, but it is kind of funny. I was thinking about him the other day, actually. I forget who it was. I was watching something. Someone had done something to their neck, and they were talking about how they had to essentially do the same thing. They were like, I don't have time for a surgery. I don't have time to do all this shit. And I think it was someone who works out, and they were like, yeah, that was who it was. It was Big E from WWE. He was basically talking about after his breaking his neck and having a horrible neck injury due to an in-ring snafu. He basically has been out of wrestling for like the last 7-8 months, understandably. And he just recently got cleared that it's not broken and he can kind of do things, but he can't wrestle. But he was talking about how like he was working out within 2 weeks of breaking his neck, and you know his doctor was just like, as long as you wear like the collar and you do that and it kind of keeps everything supported. And I was thinking about how I was like, man, I guess like it really is what it sounds like. You know, you hear someone say I broke my neck and you're like, fuck, you are done, you're cooked, man. And then you can find out it's like, no, just wear this like weird foamy collar and you can go about most of your day-to-day life as long as it's not super strenuous. And to me, like, that's just so fucking wild to hear. And to have thought about it again in a different perspective of literally someone getting dropped on their head in, you know, professional wrestling and just walking around with this foam collar and can still go work out and do whatever. Like, it was interesting and funny to see all the photos and videos of Josh just like playing in this foam collar. But to think about, you know, a 6 foot something, probably almost 300 pound, you know, gentleman working in a gym with a fucking neck brace on, you'd kind of just be like, really? But then I'm also just kind of like, maybe that'd motivate you. Or you're like, well, what's your fucking excuse for not going to work out? That dude's got a broke neck. Same with Josh. What's your excuse for not doing something? He toured the world with a broken neck in a van in less than ideal situations, probably than you would want or hope if you had that. But I think it again speaks to just the work ethic of Josh, that he's not going to miss shows. The fact that he was able to practice the set for Vanity while he was out on the road with Stick to Your Guns. I feel like that would be kind of daunting and a little bit overwhelming of just so many parts I'm remembering and hoping not to flub up at some point with somebody else. But I can definitely say during the show in Detroit, the band ripped. They were awesome. And it was good getting to talk to Josh, you know, face to face right after we had, you know, spent time doing this one. And yeah, I would love to have him back on. He's welcome to back on the show whenever he has time, wants to, whatever. And go support anything he does. Consummate professional in pretty much everything. My opinion. Starting to wrap up this episode, if you'd like to keep up with Josh, it's simple enough. You can find him on Instagram at JoshJamesXXX. And guess what? It's the same on Twitter. So there you go. If you'd like to keep up with Stick to Your Guns, it's STYGOC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can go to STYGOC.com for all Stick to Your Guns things, merch, tour dates, whatever. Go support those guys. Record's awesome. Hopefully they'll be touring back here in Michigan and go see them. And maybe I'll be able to knock off like all of Josh's bands in like 1 year of seeing them. And the podcast, you can find us simple enough, Brew Speak Pod everywhere, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can email us at brewtallyspeaking@gmail.com. You can support us monetarily if you'd like to at patreon.com/brewspeakpod. Speaking of support our sponsors if you can, rockabilia.com. Use our code BREWtally at checkout for an extra 10% off your purchase order. Bean Bastard, go to thebeanbastard.com, pick up some delicious coffee. They have soaps. They have so many things other than just coffee. And if you're in the Buffalo, New York area, please go to the brick and mortar. It's awesome. There's a lot of 80s nostalgia stuff there, plus great coffee, and it's in a nice part of Buffalo, so why not? Sober up a little bit after you go to the pink of the night before. And last but not least, On Point Pomade. Keep your beard and hair looking on point. Use our code BSP15 at checkout for an extra 15% off your order. And for the Brewtally Speaking podcast, I am John. I will see you tomorrow where our double drop is with Maria Lessing of Future Palace and Patrick Galante of Ice 9 Kills. Those were fun chats. I will talk to you then.